Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for tuning in. Today I'll be making this zipper text effect. I've seen this done with After Effects, but wanted to reproduce it in Geometry Nodes. For this tutorial, I'll only be covering the basic mesh animation, but with simple modifications, you can loop, change zipper directions, etc. to fit to your likings. Sky's the limit when it comes to Geometry Nodes. Okay, let's get into it. Alright, as soon as we get into Blender, we'll hop right into Geometry Nodes layout. A to select all, X to delete. Shift A, add mesh plane. Using numpad 7 and 5, go into top worst graphic view. Click on new, delete group input, add a string input. With all caps, type in test. Pass it through strings to curve and output. Alright, so today's effect is going to be a zipper effect. So what's going to happen is we'll have a split down the middle like so, and the text is going to start peeling, and there's going to be a new text coming out of the middle like so. Right, so let's get into it, and I'll just move it around. The first thing is realizing instance, convert the curve instance to curve, and resample. We'll add more points by changing it to length and changing the value to 0.01, and we'll go through this filling curve like so. Okay. We will be using mesh boolean to cut the text in half, so we will need a cutter object, which we'll be making by using the bounding box. So pull out a bounding box right here, and let's take a look at the bounding box. As you can see in the spreadsheet, we have 8 vertices, which we don't really need. So I'm just gonna merge by distance and bring it down to 4. Next, I'm gonna scale element and halve the size on the y-axis. I'm gonna change the setting to single axis, change the scale value to 0.5, and for the axis I'm gonna set it to 0, 1, 0. Okay. I also want to bring it down to the bottom, so I'm gonna use this min and put it into center like so. Okay. So now, as you can see, this box is half the size of the text. But I don't want to directly take a mesh boolean with this because it's actually flush against the text. So I'm gonna add another scale element and scale it by 1.001 to increase it a bit. Next, I'm gonna use extrude mesh to make it into a box. The reason for it is that mesh boolean doesn't usually work well with 2 planes, so I'm making this side into a volume. Right, so we'll add a mesh boolean and take a difference between the fill curve and the extrude mesh, and the result will be the top half of the text. We'll Shift D to duplicate, change the difference to intersect, and we'll get an intersect between extrude mesh and the fill text of fill curve, and this part is going to be the bottom half. Right. So we actually have 3 meshes to work with, which is the original fill curve text, the top half, and the bottom half. So I'm gonna actually start with the top. Okay. So what I want to happen is for all the vertices, say for example here, to go up to the top position and squish to this line. Okay. So I'm gonna add a set position, and I want to get this line, so what I'm gonna have is a bounding box, and from max I'm gonna use a separate XYZ. Okay. Next I'm gonna add a position node and also separate the XYZ from the position. And from position X, I'm gonna use a combine X and connect it to X. From the bounding box Y, I'm gonna connect it to Y, like so. So if I were to connect this to position, you can see all the mesh squished up to this top position, and that's exactly what I want. So next, for animation purpose, what I want to happen is I want the original position of all the points to shift to this position. So what I'm going to do is add a position node and add a mix, reconnect it up like so. So if I were to change the factor, it goes from the original position to the squished position. All right, cool. I'm just gonna push it down a little bit, like so. And reorganize. I'm just gonna split it up like that. Okay, so let's move on to the bottom half, right? So bottom half, we're basically gonna do the same thing. So I'm gonna duplicate this, bring it down. And reconnect. Alright, so if I were to change the factor, you can see it squishing up to the top, but I actually want it to squish down to the bottom. So I'm going to reconnect the separate XYZ to the bounding box min instead of max. And now if I were to change the factor, it squishes down to the bottom. Great. So I'm gonna actually join these two geometries, and then I'm gonna pull out a value node so I can control these two factors together. So if I were to change the value, you can see the text splitting up and squishing it to the bottom and top. Alright, so we're done with the splitting text. So the original text that splits up, I'm going to move on to the text that grows from the middle. So I will be using this original fill curve. I'm going to move these down so I have a little bit more space. Right, so we are going to pretty much do the same thing with this as well. So I'm going to shift the duplicate to the top, reconnect like so, and if I change the factor, it's going to squish to the top, which is not exactly what I want. And for this, what I want to happen is the original position to be squished in the middle, and I want it to stretch out to the top and bottom, like so, right? So what I'm gonna do is bring this bounding box to the left, disconnect, connect it up to vector mass, and I'm gonna add max and min. Then I'm gonna use a vector mass scale and scale it by 0.5, then connect it right here. Okay, so if I were to change the factor right now, it's going to squish to the middle, but I want the original position to be squished. So what I'm going to do is flip these two connections around like so. Okay, so now the text is squished to at factor 0 and stretched at factor 1. I'm going to reconnect this up to the external value, so it's going to be controlled by this single value. Then I'm going to join these two geometry and output. Okay. So if I were to change the value from 0 to 1, you can see the original text splitting up and the middle text growing in size as it goes to factor 1. Alright, so let's move on to animation. I'm just going to bring this down here and reroute. Okay. Now I'm gonna add a map range right here and disconnect the value and replace it with a scene time. So this from min and from max is basically the time setting where you want the animation to happen. So I'm gonna set it to 1 and 2, and also gonna change the end frame to 120 to shorten the animation. Okay, let's see it animate. You can see the text changing in the duration of 1 second to 2. Basically it's a straight line that doesn't really look like a zipper, right? So first thing that I'm going to do is make like a insertion angle, like so, right? What I'm going to do is bring in a position node, use a separate XYZ, and also a mask node. Connect it up, change the add to subtract, and subtract X from scene time. Okay. Now you can see the insertion is coming in at an angle, so it looks a little bit more like a zipper. If you want to control the angle of insertion, you can add a multiply node right here, and if you change the value, the angle of insertion is gonna be different. So, like so, but I'll keep it at 1. Okay. Next, I want this insertion not to be a straight line or a linear. So what I'm gonna do is add a float curve right after the map range and change the curve up like so. Maybe like that. So now you can see that there's a curve coming in and splitting up the text. Cool. It's looking better, but what I don't like is that there's no space in between the original text and the second text, right? It's kind of hard to see what's going on. So I'm gonna add a little bit of delay between these two, right? So I'm gonna go all the way to the top. After this fill curve, and between fill curve and set position, I'm gonna add a store named attribute. Call this delay and set value to 0.1. You can keep the setting as float and point, and I'm gonna go all the way back down to the bottom and add another subtract node and subtract that named attribute delay in there, right? Okay, so now you can kind of see that there's a little bit of a space between the original text and the new text, so it kind of looks more like it's being split apart, right? Cool. The geometry node part is pretty much done, so I'm just gonna add a simple material. So set material. I'm gonna add one material to the top. So this is a second text mesh that's coming out, and another material here after the first join geometry, which is the original text that's being split up. Okay. Open up a shader editor, click on new, and I'm gonna call this M1. Okay, delete the principal BSDF, add a simple RGB, and I'm gonna make it into a blue color and set the second text to 1. Next, I'm gonna copy this material, call this M2, and make it into a yellow color and set the bottom set material to this M2. Okay. Going back to frame 1, clear overlay, set it to render view, and let's see it animate. Alright, cool. It's doing what it's supposed to, so I'm just gonna change the text and make it say zipper, and maybe change the font to something like that, and reanimate, and yeah, it's looking good. Alright, let's take a look at what we just made. Okay, so I'm gonna actually bring it up a little bit more. Okay, all right, so I hope you can see what's going on, but there's basically, it looks intimidating and it looks like a lot, but it's basically doing 3 same operations. So going from left, there's a part that makes a text, there's a part that makes a cutter object, there's a part that makes a second text mesh, and there's a part that makes that original mesh that splits apart, and there's a time equation to make the animation, right? So that's basically it. So yeah, that's kind of how you make this zipper effect. Of course, you can change around materials, the content, font, and if you want to change like the direction of where the zipper happens, you can also change this time equation, right? Alright, so thank you for watching and see you next time.